Morning, everyone. This morning, I would like to reiterate two critical sections of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act 2015 as amended. First section would be section 5.1, which lists the objects of the act, and the second section will be section 6, which reads as follows. 6.1. Any procurement, contract, or agreement that is not entered into in accordance with this act shall be void and illegal. But how do we ensure that the objects of the act are achieved? The answer is pretty simple. Simply by following the operational framework designed to support the achievement of the objects of the act. Very, very easy. One thing, we have an internal control system. Your readiness checklist available on the APPR's website will assist you in that regard. We also have a general guideline entitled Internal Framework for Procurement. The other helpful tip is developing your portfolio analysis, and we would have gone through that over the last couple of weeks with key stakeholders. Your portfolio analysis helps you to understand what you are buying, to understand the norms and changing behaviors of the supply market, realistically assess your value to your supply market, and how doing business with your organization is viewed by the suppliers and contractors within the respective supply markets. And I know that all of this is sounding very familiar to you. Other tool or strategy to assist in achieving the objects of the Act is the development of the Annual Procurement Plan, again, something with which you are very familiar. And the Annual Procurement Plan speaks, of course, to the strategic level planning, which you may opt to do for one or even more years, 1, 2, 3, depending on what the project looks like. Because, of course, some projects span years. You identify your procurement objectives and the opportunities and risks to achieving those objectives in your annual procurement plan. And you consider how you can promote, in addition to transparency and value for money, other principles such as public confidence, sustainable procurement, sustainable development, and local industry development. You also have operational level planning, which you would conduct for each round of procurement. And again, I know that you would be very familiar with what I'm sharing this morning. Under your operational level planning, you would conduct your market research and develop your market research report. And you have your procurement strategy development form as well, which will form part of your procurement file or your record of procurement proceedings. Another key strategy would be becoming familiar with the procurement procedures, and we would have covered those again in the last webinar that we would have hosted, where we would have looked at open or limited bidding, single or sole source, etc. Once you become familiar with the various procurement procedures, you will then be able to select the most appropriate solicitation document, whether you want to go with invitation for bid, request for proposal, with or without negotiation, request for quotation, and so forth. You also want to become very familiar with the various selection methods, and you will remember QCBS, quality and cost-based selection. You will remember QBS, quality-based selection. You will remember least cost selection and a few others that we would have shared in the recent webinars. And then you come to contract management. How do you manage your contract? Well, in the first place, do you engage in a lump sum fixed price contract, a fixed price contract with incentive, a service level agreement, or a framework agreement, which would be most appropriate for your particular procurement? And last but not least, you will want to develop your annual procurement performance report. Now, The internal control framework recommends that you measure, analyze, and take corrective actions for your procurements during the course of the year. And of course, at the end of each fiscal, you document your performance against plan in your annual procurement performance report. You will also therein develop your lessons learned and incorporate action plans for improvement in the subsequent annual procurement plan. So you can see how cyclical it is from plan to plan. So in today's session, we will look at how do you link the annual procurement plan with the performance on your procurement projects during the course of the year to finally reporting on that performance in the annual procurement performance report. You will recall, for example, that in your annual procurement plan, you would have identified your procurement objectives for your various categories of procurement spend. So for example, for the low risk, low value category, you may have identified your overall objective for all of the procurements that fell into that category as minimizing transaction costs. You would also have developed a number of strategies and identified tools and techniques to assist you with achieving your objective of minimizing your transaction costs. For example, you would have ensured that you utilize a simplified procurement process for your low risk, low value items so that your scarce resources could be fully applied to your higher risk and higher value procurements. You may also have set performance targets, such as reduced cycle time for your various categories of procurement spend. In addition, you would have identified some general strategies for improving procurement capacity within your organization. And all of this would be, of course, as you will recall, in your annual procurement plan. Now, one such strategy might have been to attend, for example, the training sessions hosted by the APPR, where you can get more information and build internal capacity free of charge. Then, during the course of the year, you would have put your plan into action, measuring and reporting internally, probably on a monthly basis. In completing your annual procurement performance report, therefore, you will want to record your performance against plan, taking note of your successes, weaknesses, and strategies, so that you can use your lessons learned to improve your performance in the next fiscal and beyond. Remember, the overall objective is always to ensure that the objects of the Act are achieved. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and without further ado, I would now like to hand you over to Ms. Hafzah Kelly Sooknanan, who will take you through this morning's first presentation from this session entitled Developing Your Annual Procurement Performance Report.
Thank you, Pastora. Good day, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on developing the Annual Procurement Performance Report. In today's session, we want to present to you the reporting framework for public procurement that will be required upon full proclamation of the Act. Then we will take you through completing the various sections of the Annual Procurement Performance Report template, and to close the learning session, you get the opportunity to practice what we've gone through by completing an assignment. First, here's some food for thought. In a typical procurement process, you start with identifying the need. You look at the funding that is available, conduct market research and analysis, which leads to specification development for the solicitation document. After solicitation, you will receive some bids to which evaluation criteria are applied. Subsequent to the award, contract management takes place and the product is then received. Next, you pay for the product and you report on contract performance. How many times after this is done, you realize that the true need was really this? For sure, some of us have experienced at least one of these. Let's call them missteps in the procurement process. Be it simply public procurement not done well, corruption, mismanagement of the contract, whatever the reason, each one contributed to not achieving a goal. Now, under the new public procurement regime, focus is placed on improving public procurement performance, hence the introduction of the Annual Procurement Performance Report. Improving performance starts at the micro level, which is where you look at a single transaction, like we just showed on the slide. The improvements here then feed into macro or strategic. But changes and improvements don't just happen by themselves. No, you need a plan. The annual procurement plan, to be precise. Process depicted on this slide is a representation of the steps to be followed when developing your annual procurement plan. Of course, this information can be found in the general guidelines on the APPR's website on developing the annual procurement plan. But just to refresh everyone's mind today, and possibly for those who missed our previous sessions on developing the annual procurement plan, step 1 involves reviewing the organization's mandate and strategy. This is simply because procurement activities support organizational mandates or objectives on a daily basis by acquiring the necessary inputs for the organization to do its work. Step 2 of the planning process is twofold, and it involves analyzing the organization's procurement portfolio as well as the organization's procurement function and capability. Step 3 involves identifying strategic procurement objectives, and this step stems from the analysis of step 2. Step 4 is the development and implementation of the procurement strategy, which is the completion of the annual procurement plan and execution of the planned procurement activities in accordance with the identified strategies. And step 5 involves measuring results, which is done by monitoring the entity's activities and transactions to assess its performance over time and to evaluate the procurement strategies employed. Why are we going through the plan when today's topic is on the report? Well, that is because each of these steps in the planning process are linked to today's topic. So let's explore this link. We start with, how do you come up with the procurement activities that you undertake? In the sessions on developing the annual procurement plan, it was mentioned that the procurement objectives stem from the organizational objectives. So when you plan and execute your procurement activities, it contributes to the organization reaching its strategic objectives. Let's look at an example. Say one of the Ministry of National Security's strategic objective is to enhance intelligence-based decision-making. How would procurement contribute to achieving this? Well, this project could have a number of procurement activities to be carried out in furtherance of this objective, such as supply, install, and commission surveillance equipment. Or even before that, they could require consultancy services to conduct needs analysis, to identify the true need, and later to design a system for them. Also, whilst they're commissioning the equipment, training of staff may also be needed. So hopefully you see how all these procurement projects contribute directly to the Ministry of National Security achieving the strategic objective of enhancing intelligence-based decision-making. Simply put, procurement is a business tool that produces outputs. These outputs help you to reach your programmatic goals, which then feed into achieving outcomes, and those would be your strategic objectives. But how do you know if you've reached those strategic objectives? You measure, you monitor, and you report. So on the slide, you would see that we've already gone through the planning process and we just discussed executing. Next, we'll talk about reporting. Do you recall step 5 of the annual procurement planning process? Yeah, measuring results. Here, any aspect of the procurement effort can be targeted for performance measuring and monitoring with a view toward performance improvement. That's right. Even in the annual procurement plan, you plan what would be measured and monitored during the period, which is then analyzed and reported on in the report. So we are saying start with what was analyzed in the plan and move from there when developing your report. This would require data collection, KPIs, benchmarks, analysis, and conclusions, all of which we'll get to shortly. But it doesn't stop with writing a report. No, there's a greater purpose for this body of work. So on this slide, you will see an excerpt from the annual procurement plan template. And we've highlighted the sections where you will use the report information. So at 2.1, it asks for an analysis of the key issues in prior year performance. At 2.2, it looks at progress made during the last period in improving procurement performance, as well as any learnings. And at 2.3 of the APP templates, that's the annual procurement plan template, it requires you to explain the results of baseline or prior measurements, along with how that same information will help future procurement strategy development. So let's tie it all in. So you have the plan for year 1, then you completed the report for year 1. Next, the greater purpose is that you use the report from year 1 to inform aspects as shown on the slide 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. So you use the report from year 1 to inform aspects of the plan for year 2. And then the cycle is complete. So this is how the annual procurement plan and the annual procurement performance report are linked. Hopefully that linkage provided some context. Now we look at what is an annual procurement performance report and why do we need to do one. So basically, it's an annual assessment. The annual assessment highlights performance and achievements. It also contains slippages, if any, in delivering on the organization's programmatic goals and strategic objectives. And it tracks compliance with the procurement strategies as stated in the annual procurement plan. So why do we need this report? First, it's a reporting tool, and it's used to demonstrate the effectiveness of the processes we've undertaken, to demonstrate transparency in the public body's procurement activities, and how procurement activities delivered value for money. So basically, we needed to report on achieving all the objects of the Act. We also need it because it's a managerial tool, and it can be used to inform decision-making. It can provide a basis, it does provide a basis for continuous improvement using the lessons learned. And as we just discussed, the results informed the development of the annual procurement plan for the next fiscal. So who is responsible for this body of work? That would be the named procurement officer who prepares the report within 6 weeks after the close of the fiscal. The accounting officer then approves the report, then it is sent to the Office of Procurement Regulation. Just a note here, the report is completed on an annual basis. However, you may have noticed that both the plan and the report are produced around the same time of the year, so the timing is a bit close. A recommendation would be to conduct your monitoring and measuring throughout the year, as Pastora just mentioned in her introduction, so that all the work does not have to be done at the end of the fiscal. This would also help in terms of real-time continuous improvement during the fiscal. Now we move on to assessing procurement performance. So the annual procurement performance report assesses performance of public procurement systems at 2 distinct levels. At the start of the presentation, we highlighted the macro level. This is the first level that is assessed when compiling the report. You may also hear us refer to this as the operational or transactional level. Next, performance is assessed at the macro level, And you may hear us refer to this as organizational or strategic level. Now, these levels are closely interconnected. What that means is that performance at the transactional level has an impact or feeds into strategic level performance. I hope you're remembering the Ministry of National Security example we went through a bit earlier. Now that we know that we have to measure on both levels in order to get a complete picture of the public body's public procurement performance, let's look at how performance measuring and monitoring is made up of streamlining areas of concern, identifying KPIs, establishing benchmarks, and reviewing the system. Now, these are the key aspects of performance measuring and monitoring, and we'll be delving into each of these next. First, we look at streamlining areas of concern. And what this means is that performance measuring and monitoring should be done in an organized and focused manner. So narrow down to only those areas that are most critical for you at the moment, and those that would help you concentrate your improvement efforts. On the slide, we've identified some broad headings: internal stakeholder satisfaction, supplier relationships, financial performance, and talent management. Each of these will reveal a number of associated KPIs. You're probably thinking the more KPIs, the merrier, but that is not the case. Tracking too many key performance indicators all at once can lead to confusion, poor measurement, and extra unnecessary work. So again, you want to streamline your areas of concern, so select only those areas where you want to focus your improvement efforts. So now on to identifying key performance indicators, which are yardsticks indicating how far you've progressed towards the fulfillment of your business goals. They are used to make sure you are on track with your objectives, and these would be both operational objectives and organizational objectives. So how to identify KPIs? For this, there are a few tips on the slide, but basically you want to keep it smart. So let's look at an example. Say the KPI has to do with supplier complaints. How would you apply a SMART criteria? Specific would be decreasing the number of supplier complaints. Measurable is about if you can measure the decrease in the number of complaints. And yes, because there's probably a data capture system that can track the information for you. Next, is it attainable? With certain adjustments to procurement strategies, methods, and procedures, the KPI is definitely achievable. You want to make sure it's relevant. Being a ministry using public funds and given the objects of the Act, some supplier complaints can affect the availability of supply. It can also affect overall how you achieve all your objects of the Act, such as public confidence and value for money. So again, yes, I think this qualifies as being a relevant KPI. And last, time bound. You can keep a tab on the KPI, whether monthly or quarterly. So it seems like this KPI has passed the SMART test. Piece of cake, right? To review, we've streamlined areas of concern, then we've identified the KPIs. Before we move on to the next two aspects of measuring and monitoring, the OPR wants to make life easy for all public bodies. So note section 7 of the OPR's general guideline on developing the Annual Procurement Performance Report. Here you will find a list of KPIs that you can use. A few popular ones include procurement cycle time, cost reduction, and my personal favorite, rejected bids. Definitely worth checking out when you're doing your report or even your plan, or both, since they are linked. The next aspect of measuring performance has to do with benchmarks and baseline. So remember, we're talking about improving performance. And in order to know if we are doing better or worse, we have to compare our performance to something. There are several ways to benchmark. For example, you can benchmark externally, like against competitors in the industry. For example, Republic Bank can benchmark against Scotia or RBC. Internally, you can also benchmark internally, and that would be against departments within your own organization, which is where you would compare performance, processes, and practices against other parts of the business, like other teams, other business units, other groups. Now, these are just a couple. For our purpose, we are going to look at historical benchmarking as the comparator to measure. So with historical benchmarking, you compare how you performed this year against how you performed last year to see if you did better or if you recovered from some poor performance, or perhaps even if you didn't move at all. Of course, this is done for each successive period. But where would it all start? And that would be when the baseline was established. Now, the baseline for public bodies under the new public procurement regime would be the results of your first annual procurement performance report. So the table on this slide has a tool from the general guideline on developing the annual procurement performance report. Around pages 11 and 12, you will find the complete tool. So if you look at the table, you will see some indicators tied to some objectives, which really are some of the objectives of the Act. And here, as you can see to the right, what is being measured is frequency. Now, by doing this, the public body would be establishing, and by doing this, I mean starting with completing this table in your baseline year. By doing this, the public body would be establishing a baseline for future measurement and monitoring. So let's tie it all in. You've identified your KPIs, which will give you current performance. Next, to determine if improvement is being made, you will use the result from the KPIs, and based on historical benchmarking, you will compare last period results to this period. The final step in measuring performance is reviewing the system. So we have the results, we've compared them. Next, we want to review our procurement system based on these results. Let me repeat. What we want to do next is to review our procurement system, that would be the public body's procurement system, based on the results. So the way to do this would be to set up regular meetings to review, to track progress, based on the attainment of the KPI targets. Then you would determine and implement corrective action, if necessary, to get back on course towards achieving the strategic objectives. But let's delve a little deeper. What does review the system mean to the public body? For this, the general guideline framework of internal control for public procurement is essential. This guideline introduces the 5 control elements on the slide, which make up the operational framework of internal control. Now, the framework, like every other aspect of procurement, the framework addresses the organizational dimensions in 2 integrated aspects: organizational level performance and organizational level management, wherein the former sets the standards, objectives, and strategies through which the procurement effort is managed efficiently and effectively. So let's go back to the example with the KPI to reduce supplier complaints. In the baseline year, 7 complaints were received. In the first year under review, 9 complaints were received. The public body would want to review their procurement system to see where corrective action is needed. Now, this is transactional level monitoring. Now, remember, we said it's 2 levels and they're integrated. So at the transaction level, we just saw they would have discovered through stakeholder engagements that the majority of the complaints stem from, let's say, the bid time being too short. Now, the corrective action that they would have identified has to go through a process before it can be implemented. And this is where the organizational level management that the framework speaks to comes into play. So basically, that's just, a quick view of how you would review the system. And that would be the end of the key aspects of measuring and monitoring. It also brought us to the end of the viewpoint from behind the annual procurement performance report. Next, we will be going through the contents of the actual report with you. So please have your general guidelines on developing the annual procurement performance report handy as we go through the template. So on this slide, we have the table of contents, and the report covers an executive summary, an introduction, macro level monitoring and management, organizational level procurement performance improvement, transaction level performance monitoring and management, and transaction level procurement performance improvement. And we'll wrap up with the conclusions. So the first section of the report is the executive summary. Although it comes first, it is actually the last section of the report to be completed. And basically, it would contain a synopsis of the analysis conducted in the body of the report. We will get to this later on in the presentation as it pulls together all the information we would be going through. So section 2 of the report to be completed is the introduction. And this is where public bodies have the opportunity to link the report to the plan. And perhaps if you made any adjustments during the year to the plan, you can state such here. You can include a narrative of your procurement performance, and you can do this by using charts, tables, or graphs to display your findings. Now, before we take a close look at each of the subsections to the left of the screen, you can feel free to include in your report some background information. And this could include a summary of your programmatic goals and strategic objectives, your budgetary allocation, planned procurement projects, perhaps a categorization of the goods, works, or services according to whether it was routine, leverage, bottleneck, or strategic. Basically, your background could be any information you think can provide context to the report. Now on to subsection A of the introduction, where highlights and issues are discussed. So as you can see on the slide, the sample answer mentions the period under review and highlights the addition of procurement staff and the number of completed procurement projects. Now you'll also see that some of the issues they have put into this section would be that the procurement staff that they hired had a fairly steep learning curve. It also spotlighted that 13 of their planned procurement activities were not completed. And even so, 7 of the projects never even got started. Next is subsection B. Here, the public body can summarize information that would have been pulled together over the period. This information should reflect both levels of monitoring and measurement. And by now, you know that this refers to the organizational level as well as the operational level. So let's look at this slide. Here, the data was pulled together to show procurement performance based on rounds of procurements undertaken during the period. And this is in the context of what was contained in the annual procurement plan as per the planned procurement activities for the fiscal, which you know would have been in your schedule, right? So the introduction identified that 50 procurement activities were planned. The table on the slide shows how Ministry X performed in this regard. As you can see, 7 were deferred and 6 procurement activities are in progress, be it planning or an evaluation. So basically, the ministry is indicating here that they were able to complete 37 of their planned procurement activities. Later, my colleague Vidya will look a little bit closer at this data. Again, this slide presents just one example of the information you can include in this section. And don't forget, it can be presented in narrative or table, depending on if you measure quantitative or qualitative aspects of your procurement performance. Each public body has a mandate to fulfill or a vision to achieve, and the procurement of goods, works, and services would be the mechanism through which this is done using public funds. Now, subsection C of the introduction seeks to link the procurement performance at a transactional level with the delivery of the public body's strategic objectives. Earlier, it was identified that the provision of technical and vocational training was a strategic objective. In furtherance of this, Ministry X undertook the related procurement activities, such as renting properties with the appropriate equipment to carry out the training. They determined that they would be providing participants with tablets, and of course, they needed persons with the necessary skills to deliver the training session. Now, when reporting on this strategic objective of providing technical and vocational training, they looked at what was completed and how it was measured against their estimated expenditure. For property rental, you could see that the estimate was somewhat off. There was a variance of $25,000. With the procurement of tablets, they were able to stay a good bit under their estimates. And for lecturer services, they seem to be on target with their estimate. Next, this subsection asks you to draw some conclusions. Here you can say what went right, what was achieved, and how this was able to help deliver on the public body's mandate and vision, or what went wrong, and what was learned, and if any corrective action would be required. Just a note, for procurements that are indirectly linked, such as procuring office furniture, stationery, and vehicles, to name a few, you can use one table to report on those, unlike this one, which just reports on a particular strategic objective. The final subsection here, D, looks at aspects of performance that will be targeted for improvement in the next period based on past period results. And this ties into something mentioned earlier. Remember when we spoke about the procurement performance report, the annual procurement performance report being a management tool? Well, in this subsection, the results of the KPI, the results of benchmarking the KPI, and the subsequent analysis of those results are all brought together. The product of this being a tool for managing procurement performance improvement in the next period. So here the public body would want to explain the performance based on results and identify the areas for improvement. So on this slide, we just gave a little sample answer. So in period under review, the following performance issues were noted. So they had insufficient technical procurement capacity, which impacted the completion of all the procurement projects. As a result of this issue, the following was targeted for future improvement, and that would be they want to do structured and focused training sessions in market research and analysis. Now, do I have to mention that this subsection will feed into the next annual procurement plan at section 2, which we showed in an earlier slide? I don't think so. Well, that brings me to the end of my part of this presentation, and I now hand you over to Janda.
Thank you, Hafzah. So at this time, we'll be going on a 5-minute break. And when we return, we will have a video and Hafzah presenting on the template. So we'll put up the timer for 5 minutes and we'll see you back in 5. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. And now I take you to Ms. Vidya Rampersad, and she will be going through completing the APPR templates with us. Vidya.
Thank you, Jandal. Good morning, everyone. I will be taking you through the remaining sections of the Annual Procurement Performance Report template using 3 examples. As Hafzah would have mentioned earlier, the APPR speaks to performance at 2 levels. To recap, the micro level assesses procurement performance on a per transaction basis, and the macro level assesses procurement performance of the organization. Essentially, the micro or transactional level feeds into the macro or the organizational level, as you will see in the following 2 instances. Section 3 of the APPR template is divided into 2 subsections. 3.1 entails information on what was measured and why. 3.2 entails the results. On your screen is a table summary of those subsections, and it measures procurement's directly linked to strategic objectives. You can go even further into detailing how many requisitions and related purchase orders were done per project. As mentioned earlier, Ministry X's strategic objective is to provide technical and vocational training. Therefore, each project or category listed here assumes the necessary activities needed to achieve this. By comparing the actual expenditure to the budget, you get a financial gist of how well the ministry met their objective through procurement. To give a complete picture of what you have procured for the fiscal year, it is suggested that 2 summaries of procurements follow this table. The first being procurements indirectly linked to your strategic objectives. This can contain categories like office supplies, building maintenance, janitorial services. The second summary of procurements will contain any unplanned projects that arose during the fiscal year. Moving on, micro feeds into macro. I'll now illustrate this to you with the first 2 projects. So don't be alarmed when you don't see the title number 4. The information required in that area will be covered in section 6. Here, the selected transaction we'll be looking at is contract. How many of you can definitively say that in every contract, the final payment to the respective contractor is equal to the original contract value? No one, right? The aim of any public body is to carry out their procurements consistent with the objects of the Act. This consistency sets up the framework for a strong performance management system. With the objective of increasing value for money, the KPI here focuses on monitoring the performance of individual contracts through order value variance. I'd like you to focus on the target. Whilst it is specific, measurable, and time-bound, do you think the 1% target is achievable and realistic? I hope not. On the other hand, setting easily achievable targets is an injustice. Remember, you are measuring your procurement performance with the aim of continuous improvement. Let me fix the target. That's better. Now, on to give this KPI context. Specialized machinery. The original contract value was 1.3 million. The actual value, 2.2 million, which produced a variance of 0.9 million. Following the formula, the specialized machinery has a result far exceeding the 10% target, thus making it adverse. Whereas, the tablet has a result less than 10%, making it favorable. What went wrong with the procurement of the specialized machinery? Section 6 answers that question, as it provides Ministry X with an opportunity to do a root cause analysis into each item or category's results. Thereafter, reasons for the outcomes are identified, as well as, where necessary, the lessons learned, which then feeds in to inform and improve future procurements. Following the example, specialized machinery would have gotten an adverse result. The reason being that the specifications omitted a key component of the machinery necessary for it to be operable. Consequently, Ministry X had to source this component, which resulted in the unplanned increased costs. The lesson learned here is that procurement needed to conduct better market research. For future procurements, the ministry can consider getting technical advice to assist with developing the specifications, and where possible, factory acceptance testing can be built into solicitation documents. As you can recall, tablets would have gotten a favorable result. Regardless, it was documented here because this section is not meant to be punitive. So, therefore, you should celebrate your win. Example 2. On your screen is a table summary of how many procurements were completed within the respective cycle times. You can go even further by detailing how many contracts were awarded, the number of unfulfilled contracts, and if any procurements will be carried over to the next fiscal year. The performance metrics column shows the breakdown of purchases categorized by dollar value with an apportioned schedule timeframe that was proposed in Ministry X's Annual Procurement Plan. Following this, we have the number of projects completed and details as to how many of them were done within the KPI weeks. Again, I'll illustrate how micro feeds into macro by using the tablets, which would have been valued at 5,800, so it falls into the simple purchases category, as well as the specialized machinery, which was valued at 2.2 million, placing it into the complex purchases category. Ministry X's intention is to improve efficiency by completing their procurement objectives within reasonable time, cost, and minimum wastage through focus on optimizing the procurement cycle duration, which is the average time span of accepting an approved purchase requisition to the award of the contract. To improve efficiency, the target would ideally be to reducing the procurement cycle duration. Let's apply the formula to the tablets and specialized machinery. Here we see that the purchase of the tablets took 4 weeks. The planned time for the simple purchase is 10 weeks. Following the formula, the 4 is divided by 10 and then multiplied by 100 to find the percentage. Our target is less than or equal to 100%. At 40%, Ministry X would have achieved their target for the tablets. As such, this result is favorable. This 40% now becomes the benchmark upon which Ministry X can improve on for the forthcoming APPRs. Moving on, specialized machinery. The same calculation was done, but the result exceeds the target, making it adverse. Remember, our objective is to improve efficiency, so spending more time than we would have planned on a purchase is not what is ideal. Let's see how to rectify this result. To determine the reason for the adverse result, we need to return to what is being measured, which is the time it takes to complete the stages of procurement. On your screen, you will see the 4 stages. At each stage, there's some sort of documentation of the procurement proceedings. Therein lies your reason. And once you know why it took so long, writing how to fix this should be your next plan of action. Again, we celebrated the win of the tablets' favorable result by documenting that it had been purchased before, leading to a fluency in all procurements required. As for the specialized machinery, the reason for the adverse result was that this was a first-time purchase for Ministry X. This led to a longer than expected time to fully align the specifications with the true need. The lesson learned here was that staff lacked capacity. The corrective action looks at Ministry X seeking help from the subject matter experts to be able to formulate the market research report and procurement strategy development form to an acceptable level. So far, we've been looking at figures and formulas. This final example shows how qualitative KPIs can be included in your report. Within Ministry X's Annual Procurement Plan, it was identified that their procurement staff did not have satisfactory depth of training and experience to provide the levels of expertise needed to efficiently do their jobs. So, the ministry created a general strategy to improve their staff's basic procurement capacity by engaging and providing training opportunities tailored to any gaps identified in their competence. Here, the results are two options, whereby at the end of the fiscal year, the ministry noted that it did not achieve billing staff's capacity. Let's see why. The reason indicates that while selective staff did engage in training courses, they were unable to implement learnings to the job as there was resistance to change from other staff members in completing any market research reports and procurement strategy development forms. The lesson learned is that a change management system is needed. And for future procurements, management support is needed to develop a framework to establish mandatory standards for execution of all procurement proceedings. Having completed all our analyses, we move to the section of the report where conclusions are drawn on whether overall procurement performance improved, declined, or met its strategic objectives. So, in regards to Ministry X, this included all the data in terms of KPIs that were collected and analyzed with their respective results, learnings, and recommendations. Since these were discussed earlier, the slide contains a simple write-up to guide you. To substantiate any information provided, appendices would accompany your annual procurement performance report. These can include, but are not limited to, the annual procurement plan for the period under review, details of contracts, details of purchase orders, and glossary of terms or acronyms. All right, everyone, that brings me to the end of my segment. I will now hand you over to Hafzah.
To close off the annual procurement performance report, we would recap with a synopsis in the executive summary, and that would be a synopsis of everything that we've reported on in the body of the report. So on this slide are some pointers and examples of information you can put into the executive summary. You would want to state the period under review, and for us, we looked at October 1st, 2021 to September 30th, 2022. You would give details of any limitations or challenges faced, and here, as Vidya went through with you guys, the procurement staffing or procurement capacity was one of the issues. You would also provide a synopsis of procurement related, and she would have already identified what are the strategies the lessons learned and corrective action to be taken. Then you would provide a synopsis of the procurement related information. And that would include a summary of the purchase requisitions, contracts that were awarded, were not awarded, number of unfulfilled contracts, what were your planned and unplanned activities, if you had any unplanned activities that you undertook during the period, and contract variations. Last, you may mention any special interest areas for procurement, and this can be procurements geared towards sustainability or local industry development. Basically, any area the public body identified in its plan for attention that it was not able to achieve, or that it actually did achieve. So that brings us to the end of this part of the session. To wrap up, here are some key takeaways. Remember to link the annual procurement plan and the annual procurement performance report for a comprehensive analysis of your procurement performance. Use SMART KPIs. Review and take corrective action. And that means don't measure for measuring's sake. Don't play the numbers game. Qualitative KPIs can also contribute to achieving strategic objectives. And remember, corrective action is identified to improve next year's performance. And finally, continuous improvement. This is to remind you that measuring isn't done at the end of the year only. Regular measuring and monitoring and reporting helps keep you focused on your strategic as well as your operational targets. It should be carried out throughout the period, and it is formalized in the annual procurement performance report. And it is not just about the period under review, it also looks at the next period, and where applicable, continuous improvement may also look at next years, like 4 to 5 years. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. We do hope this session provided an appreciation of the value of monitoring and measuring procurement performance in the context of the organization's micro and macro performance, as this contributes to the attainment of the strategic objectives of the organization as well as to the objects of the Act.
Thank you so much for joining with us today. You can submit any further questions at feedback@opr.org.tt.